On a cold night, as a light drizzle fell, the gas station lights illuminated the wet streets of Los Angeles. Dwayne Johnson, known for his humility off-screen, stopped to refuel his motorcycle. Everything seemed normal until he noticed something that made him pause. A young pregnant woman, visibly exhausted, running back and forth between carrying heavy boxes and filling car tanks. She barely had a moment to catch her breath. What Dwayne did next left everyone at the station speechless and completely changed that woman's day. You won't believe the impact of his gesture. The night in Los Angeles was calm, but carried a subtle melancholy. On a quiet street, a gas station blinked its red and blue neon lights against the wet asphalt, dampened by a constant drizzle. For most, it was just an ordinary place, but for Sarah, that gas station meant survival. 7 months pregnant, Sarah moved with determination between the pumps, wiping windshields and checking oil for hurried customers. Her thin jacket and worn work uniform offered little protection from the cold, but she couldn't afford to think about that. Tonight's paycheck was essential to cover another month's rent. Jane, her 8-year-old daughter, sat on a plastic chair under the station's awning, sheltered from the drizzle. Her small fingers tightly gripped a worn red pencil as she carefully sketched in an old activity book. Beside her lay just 2 other equally short pencils, blue and yellow. With so little, Jane focused intently, filling the pages with drawings that seemed deeply meaningful. As Sarah worked, the low hum of a powerful engine echoed through the station. A black motorcycle rolled smoothly to one of the pumps. Dwayne Johnson, dressed in a black leather jacket and helmet, dismounted with fluid movements. He removed his helmet, revealing slightly messy hair dampened by the rain. Dwayne scanned the scene, taking in his surroundings. His gaze stopped on Sarah for a moment. He noticed the way she efficiently cleaned a windshield, maintaining a polite smile for the customers despite her evident fatigue. His attention then shifted to Sophia, engrossed in her sketch as if she were creating something important. Curious, Dwayne walked closer to the child and glanced at her drawing. It was a simple but detailed scene. A kitchen with steaming pots and pans, a table in the center, and what looked like a counter with a blank sign. Dwayne leaned slightly, observing the careful strokes, noticing how Jane seemed focused on a specific space in the drawing that remained unfinished. "Do you like to draw?" he asked gently. Jane looked up briefly, surprised by his presence, but nodded shyly. "I draw places I want to go." Dwayne smiled. "And this place, what is it?" Jane hesitated, looking back at her drawing. She squeezed a red pencil in her small hand, as if deciding what to say. Before she could answer, Sarah appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. "Jane, don't bother the gentleman," she said with a polite smile. "She's not bothering me," Dwayne replied calmly. "In fact, I was learning about her drawings and the places she wants to see." Sarah gave him a look that mixed curiosity and caution, but before she could say more, a car honked at the next pump. "Excuse me," she said, turning to attend to the customer. Dwayne stood for a moment, watching as Sarah returned to work. His eyes then returned to Jane and her unfinished sketch. Something about this moment felt bigger than he could fully grasp. Sarah wiped the last windshield of the night, but her movements had slowed considerably. The weight of her pregnancy pressed against her lower back, sending waves of pain radiating with every step. She tried to master discomfort, but each time she bent down or stretched to reach the center of the glass, her face betrayed her exhaustion. As the last customer finally drove away, she leaned lightly against one of the pumps, trying to ease the pressure on her back. Sarah took a deep breath, closing her eyes briefly to hold back tears. It wasn't just the physical pain. It was the emotional burden, the accumulated fatigue of nights like this. From a distance, Dwayne noticed but didn't approach immediately. He watched as she adjusted her uniform and forced a smile before turning back toward the station counter. Jane, sitting in her worn plastic chair, looked up from her sketchbook and noticed her mother's discomfort. "Are you okay, Mama?" she asked softly. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Sarah replied, forcing a smile as she sat in the chair beside her daughter. Dwayne, seeing the hesitation in Sarah's answer, finally stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said gently, trying not to startle her. "Do you need help with something? You seem tired." Sarah looked at him, surprised, but her instinct was to refuse. "Thank you, but I'm fine. Just a little back pain. It's normal for pregnancy." "Normal shouldn't mean constant," Dwayne replied calmly, his voice carrying a kindness that made Sarah pause. She shook her head, looking down at the ground. "There's not much to be done. It's just part of life." Dwayne didn't press further, but saw how she supported her lower back as she sat. He crouched slightly, keeping a respectful distance. "Do you do this every night?" Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon instead of him. "2 nights a week here, and in the mornings I clean offices. It's what pays the rent and keeps Sophia in school." Dwayne was silent for a moment, processing what she had just shared. "And when do you rest?" he asked softly. Sarah let out a quiet laugh, devoid of humor. "Rest? I don't really have time for that. Bills don't wait. And with the baby coming, I need to work even more. There's no choice." "It shouldn't have to be this way," Dwayne said, almost in a whisper. Sarah looked at him directly for the first time, her eyes filled with exhaustion. "But it is, at least for me. I made choices that brought me here. I can't complain. Complaining doesn't help." Jane, who had been listening quietly, placed her small hand over her mother's. "You do everything for me, Mama." Sarah's expression softened, but tears welled in her eyes. "Because you're all that matters, Jane. You're the reason I keep going." Dwayne observed the exchange between mother and daughter, feeling a deep empathy for Sarah. He realized that this woman wasn't just carrying the weight of her pregnancy and grueling shifts. She was also carrying the emotional burden of ensuring Jane's safety and giving her a dignified life, even when it seemed impossible. Sarah began, her voice breaking slightly. "Sometimes, I wonder if I'm doing enough. If one day, she'll look back and think that I just fought but never really lived. That I never gave her something beautiful." Jane squeezed her mother's hand tightly. "You give me everything, Mama." Sarah smiled, but a shadow passed over her eyes. Dwayne noticed she was holding back something deeper. "What about her father?" he asked gently. Sarah froze for a moment before answering. "He left when he found out I was pregnant again." Dwayne felt a knot tighten in his chest. He said he didn't want another responsibility, that it was already hard enough with one child. Sarah paused, her voice faltering slightly. "So he packed his things and left." Dwayne remained silent, the weight of Jane's words echoing within him. He looked back at Mary and knew at that moment that he had to do something. What he was about to do would change everything for them and leave everyone speechless. "I'd like to ask you something," Dwayne said with a calm tone. Sarah looked at him, slightly surprised, but gestured for him to continue. "If you could have one chance, just one, to do something different, what would it be?" Sarah hesitated. The question seemed simple, but the answer carried immense weight. She looked down at the wet ground, thinking for a moment. "I don't know. I don't think I can afford to think like that anymore. There's no room for what-ifs when you have bills to pay and children to raise." Dwayne nodded, understanding her resistance. "I imagine you've had to give up a lot because of that." "Giving up, that's not the right word," Sarah said, shaking her head. "It's more like—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Life just doesn't allow certain things. You can't dream when you're barely making rent." Jane lifted her eyes from her drawing and looked at her mother. "But you still cook, Mama, and you make the best lasagna in the world." Sarah chuckled softly, a laugh tinged with sadness. "Making lasagna at home and running a restaurant are two very different things, sweetheart. But you've wanted a restaurant, haven't you?" Dwayne asked, turning his attention back to Sarah. She was silent for a moment. Then, in a low voice, she replied, "Yes. When I was younger, before all of this, before James, Dwayne caught the weight in her voice when she said the name. Your husband. Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. When we got married, we dreamed of opening a restaurant together. He used to say I had a gift, that my love for food was special. But after Jane was born, things changed. It got harder, and when I found out I was pregnant again, he left. Jane squeezed her mother's hand tightly, offering silent comfort. Sarah swallowed hard before continuing. He said he couldn't handle another burden, that he didn't want another responsibility. And then he just walked away. Dwayne felt a knot tighten in his chest. He looked at Jane, now drawing quietly, and then at Sarah, who was doing her best to maintain a composed posture. He straightened up, looking at Sarah with a serious expression. Maybe you feel like you don't have any choices right now, he said, but what if you had help? What if there was a way to change that? Sarah frowned, clearly skeptical. I appreciate it, but I don't need charity. I'm fine. I'm not talking about charity, Dwayne replied, his voice firm yet gentle. I'm talking about an opportunity, something that could help you dream again. Sarah shook her head, clearly grappling with his words. Why do you care? I'm nobody important. Because everyone deserves the chance to dream, Dwayne said calmly. And because you deserve more than just surviving. Dwayne's tone grew resolute. I'll be back tomorrow. Sarah stared at him, unsure of how to respond. Why? Because I think you deserve more than this, he replied, gesturing subtly toward Jane's notebook and the station around them. See you tomorrow. As Dwayne walked away to mount his motorcycle, Sarah stood still, speechless. She didn't know what to make of his promise to return, but what he would bring the next day was something she could never have imagined. The next morning, Sarah finished her shift at the gas station and was organizing her things behind the counter when she heard the familiar rumble of a deep motorcycle engine. She knew it wasn't a coincidence. Jane, who was beside her drawing, stopped and looked toward the sound with curiosity. Dwayne parked his bike at the same pump as the night before, stepping off with a calm smile, holding 2 large paper bags in his hands. He seemed relaxed yet determined, like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Good morning, he greeted as he approached. Sarah looked at him, still a little wary. You actually came back. I said I would, Dwayne replied simply. He placed the bags on the counter and turned to Jane. Good morning, Jane. Good morning. Jane responded excitedly, her eyes already drawn to the bags, curious about their contents. Dwayne turned to Sarah, noticing her hesitation. Before you say anything, I just want you to see what's in here. He opened the bags, revealing basic groceries, a few new clothes for Jane, and on top, a pristine box of brand-new colored pencils. Jane gasped in delight, grabbing the box as if it were a treasure. Pencils, she exclaimed, clutching them to her chest. Thank you, mister. Sarah watched her daughter's reaction, but her gaze lingered on the items in the bag. She opened her mouth to speak, but Dwayne interrupted her. I know what you're thinking, he said gently, but this isn't charity. It's just a little push to help you breathe easier. Sarah shook her head, fighting back emotion. I don't know if I can accept this. Dwayne placed an envelope on the counter. This is for rent, just for this month. And there's one more thing. He handed her a slightly crumpled flyer. Sarah took it and read the words carefully. Culinary course for single mothers. She blinked, confused. What is this? It's a free cooking course, Dwayne explained. It covers professional techniques and even helps with the business side of things. In case you ever want to turn this into something bigger. Sarah looked at the flyer, then back at Keanu, clearly struggling to process what was happening. Why are you doing this? You don't even know us. Dwayne offered a small smile, his expression serious yet kind. Because you deserve it, and because sometimes one act of kindness can change everything. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to keep her tears at bay. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, Dwayne replied. Just think about it, and know that someone believes in you. Jane, still clutching the pencils, looked at the flyer in her mother's hand. "Mama, will you learn new recipes? Like the ones Grandma used to make?" Sarah looked at her daughter, then back at the flyer. For a moment, something seemed to shift within her, a small space for hope, however faint. She held the flyer, glancing at Jane and then back at Dwayne. Still hesitant, but with a newfound spark in her eyes, she whispered, "Maybe it's time to try." Little did she know, what Keanu planned next would be even more transformative. Months had passed since that morning at the gas station. The culinary course Sarah had joined didn't just refine her cooking skills. It unlocked doors she had never imagined possible. With each class, she rediscovered her passion for food and, more importantly, its power to bring people together. Dwayne had kept his promise. During that time, he worked quietly on something bigger. While Sarah learned, he gathered contacts, sought support, and found the perfect little space in the neighborhood. It was simple yet inviting, the ideal spot for what was to come. On a special morning, Sarah and Jane arrived at the location, unsure of what awaited them. Dwayne stood there, wearing his familiar calm smile, waiting by the building's entrance. "What is this?" Sarah asked, her eyes scanning the storefront. Dwayne stepped aside, revealing a sign above the door. The elegant lettering read, "La Cucina di Nana." Sarah froze, shock written across her face. She brought a hand to her mouth, trying to contain her emotions as tears quietly rolled down her cheeks. Jane clung to her mother's arm, her eyes sparkling with excitement. It's your restaurant, Mama," she exclaimed, tugging at her to step forward. Sarah turned to Dwayne, disbelief in her expression. You did this?" "Why?" Dwayne smiled, though his tone was serious. "Because you deserve it. Because your story and your talent are special, and the world needs to see them. And because no one should have to give up on their dreams." They entered together. The inside of the restaurant was simple, but it had everything Sarah needed to start. A functional kitchen, neatly arranged tables, and thoughtful details reminiscent of her grandmother's restaurant in Italy. Jane ran to a small corner where a table was set up for children to draw. A box of colored pencils, the same one Dwayne had given her months ago, lay neatly beside blank sheets of paper. Sarah ran her fingers across the surfaces, still trying to grasp the reality of it all. She turned to Dwayne, searching for the right words. I don't know how to thank you for this." "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "Just do what you do best. Cook, bring people together, and pass this kindness forward when you can." The grand opening happened days later, and La Cucina di Nana quickly became a cherished gathering spot in the community. Sarah crafted dishes that told stories, each inspired by her grandmother's recipes, but with her own creative twist. The food was incredible, but what truly made the place special was the heart Sarah poured into every detail. On the night of the opening, Jane sat at a table, proudly handing out menus she had designed herself. Sarah was in the kitchen, preparing a lasagna, while the restaurant buzzed with laughter and conversation. Dwayne sat at a quiet table in the corner, observing it all. When Sarah brought the lasagna to his table, she sat down for a moment, smiling. "I never imagined I'd be here," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Dwayne glanced around. "But you deserve to be. What you've created here, it's something everyone needs to experience." As Sarah looked around the bustling restaurant, she realized her dream had come back to life. But the true transformation wasn't just in her own life. The ripple effect of that one act of kindness on her community was only beginning. If this story inspired you, take action now. Stories like this remind us that kindness and dreams can change lives. If you found this story moving, don't just stop here. Help spread the message. Like this video if you believe in the power of kindness. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story that touches the heart. Share this video with someone who needs inspiration today. Comment below. What was your favorite moment from this story? Have you ever experienced or witnessed an act of kindness that changed someone's life? Let's start a conversation. Turn on notifications so you're the first to hear our next powerful story. Remember, a single act of kindness can change someone's life. Will you be that change today?